You've never belonged anywhere. Not in your family, not in your friendships, not in any version of life you've lived, and you've always blamed yourself for it. But what if the truth is that you don't belong here because your consciousness is resonating with a completely different timeline, one your physical life hasn't caught up to yet? If you felt misplaced, dislocated, or watching life from the outside, this is the moment you discover why. You've felt out of place your entire life, not in the way that awkward teenagers feel out of place, or the way introverts feel uncomfortable at parties. This is different. This is fundamental. This is the persistent, aching sensation that you're living in the wrong reality altogether. It started early. As a child, you would sit in classrooms and feel like you were watching your life through glass. Your classmates seemed to inhabit their bodies so naturally, so completely, while you felt like a consciousness floating just above your own skin. You participated in the expected rituals, raising your hand, reciting lessons, playing at recess, but it all felt like an elaborate performance, as if you were reading lines from a script written for someone else. The feeling followed you home, family dinners where conversations felt like they were happening in a foreign language, even though everyone spoke your native tongue. You'd watch your siblings argue over trivial things and wonder how they could care so deeply about such small concerns. Their problems felt distant, their joys hollow. You loved them, but it was the kind of love you might feel for characters in a book, tender but removed. Teachers called you mature for your age. Friends described you as an old soul, but you knew it wasn't wisdom that separated you from your peers. It was frequency. You vibrated at a different rate than everything around you, like a radio slightly off station, picking up fragments of the intended broadcast, but mostly receiving static. Time felt wrong too. Sometimes hours would pass like minutes, sometimes minutes stretched like hours, and neither had anything to do with whether you were bored or engaged. It was as if your internal clock was calibrated to a different dimension, counting moments that didn't exist in the world you were trapped in. People around you began to feel like non-player characters, NPCs going through their programmed motions. They had their routines, their predictable responses, their scripted concerns. You could almost anticipate what they would say before they said it, not because you were psychic, but because their patterns were so limited, so repetitive. They seemed satisfied with lives that felt to you like elaborate hamster wheels. You tried to fit in. You adopted their interests, mimicked their speech patterns, learned to laugh at their jokes. But it was always an imitation, a careful study in how to appear normal. Inside, you felt like an anthropologist documenting a strange tribe, taking notes on rituals you could observe but never truly understand. The most disturbing part was how the same emotional experiences kept repeating. Not just similar situations, the exact same emotional frequencies. You'd have a conversation with someone and feel the uncanny certainty that you had had this exact exchange before, not just in content but in essence. The way their face moved, the way the light hit the room, the precise quality of disappointment or confusion or forced cheer, it all felt like a loop, like you were living the same day disguised as different days. You started recognizing patterns everywhere. The cashier who always had the same tired expression, the co-worker who told the same 3 stories in rotation, the friend who always asked how you were doing but never listened to the answer. They weren't just predictable, they were stuck, cycling through the same limited range of responses like music boxes, playing their single mechanical songs. And then there were the glitches, moments when reality seemed to skip, like a scratched CD. You'd be walking down a familiar street and suddenly nothing looked right, not because anything had changed, but because your perspective had shifted. The world looked flatter, like a stage set. The sky seemed painted on. People moved with an artificial quality, like actors who hadn't quite memorized their blocking. These episodes lasted only seconds, but they left you shaken. During these moments, you could feel something else, another reality bleeding through, vast and luminous and more real than anything around you. It called to you with a frequency that made your chest ache with longing. You learned not to mention these experiences to anyone. The few times you tried, you were met with concerned stares, suggestions that you might need more sleep or less stress. They couldn't feel what you felt because they belonged here, in this timeline, in this frequency. Their consciousness was perfectly calibrated to this reality. Yours was not. The loneliness was profound. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the existential isolation of being the only one who could see that the world was somehow wrong. You were surrounded by people but felt utterly alien, like a deep-sea creature accidentally caught in a shallow pond, gasping for something these surface dwellers couldn't even perceive. There had to be an explanation. There had to be others who felt this cosmic displacement, this timeline dissonance. You were not broken, you were misaligned. Your consciousness was vibrating at a frequency incompatible with your environment, like a crystal trying to sing in the wrong key. And somewhere in some other configuration of reality, there was a place where your frequency was exactly right, where you would finally belong. The universe operates on principles of resonance and frequency. Consciousness, like matter, vibrates. And sometimes a soul incarnates on a timeline it will quickly outgrow. This is not a flaw. It's a feature of spiritual evolution. Think of it as being born into a kindergarten classroom when your consciousness is already at a graduate level. The environment isn't wrong and you're not wrong, but the match is catastrophically inappropriate. You're trying to learn calculus from finger paints, seeking symphonies from toy pianos. The misalignment manifests in predictable ways. You never related to your peers, no matter how hard you tried. In elementary school, while other children played games that felt meaningless to you, you were drawn to solitude, to books, to conversations with adults who seemed to vibrate closer to your frequency. You felt older than your years, but not in a precocious way, in a deeply tired way, as if you'd already lived through what everyone around you was just beginning to discover. As you aged, the gap widened. Your concerns became increasingly incompatible with those around you. While others worried about social hierarchies, fashion trends, or weekend plans, you found yourself questioning the nature of existence, feeling disturbed by the superficiality that seemed to satisfy everyone else. Their problems felt like distractions from real questions, their solutions like band-aids on wounds they couldn't even see. You were constantly misunderstood, not just occasionally, not just by some people, but systematically, by almost everyone. Your motivations were foreign to them. Your priorities made no sense. Your emotional responses were either too intense or not intense enough for situations that seemed significant to others. It was as if you were speaking a different language, even when using the same words. The most telling symptom was the feeling of watching your life instead of living it. You moved through your days with a persistent sense of detachment, as if viewing yourself from a distance. Even your most intimate moments felt observed rather than experienced. You were present but not present, engaged but not engaged, alive but not alive in the way others seemed to be. This wasn't depression or dissociation in the clinical sense. Your detachment wasn't pathological, it was perspectival. You were looking at life from a vantage point that didn't match the reality you'd been placed in, like trying to watch a movie while sitting behind the screen. Everything appeared backwards, distorted, incomprehensible. The timeline you inhabited felt too small, too limited, too low resolution for your consciousness. Imagine trying to run advanced software on obsolete hardware. Everything would be slow, glitchy, frustratingly constrained. That's what your daily existence felt like. A vast consciousness crammed into a reality that couldn't support its complexity. Your relationships reflected this mismatch. People were drawn to you. They sensed something different, something deeper, but they couldn't sustain connection with your actual frequency. They fell in love with their projection of who you might be, then felt confused or rejected when you couldn't maintain the performance of being someone simpler, someone more compatible with their timeline. Career paths that excited others left you cold. Success metrics that motivated entire industries felt arbitrary to you. You could excel when you applied yourself, but the achievement felt hollow because the games themselves seemed pointless. You were trying to find meaning in systems designed for consciousness that operated at a completely different level. The frustration was immense. You had capabilities, insights, ways of seeing that felt powerful and important, but no appropriate outlet for them. It was like being a concert pianist forced to play Twinkle, 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 Little Star for eternity. Not challenging enough to be engaging, not simple enough to be relaxing, just an endless loop of underutilization. You began to understand that this misalignment wasn't personal, it was structural. The timeline you'd been born into was operating at one frequency, and your consciousness had evolved beyond it. This happens when souls incarnate in environments they're meant to outgrow quickly. Like spiritual exchange students placed in the wrong grade level, the good news was that this condition was temporary. The difficult news was that the transition period, the time between recognizing your misalignment and finding your true frequency, could be profoundly disorienting. You were no longer fully anchored to your original timeline, but you hadn't yet locked onto your intended destination. You were floating in between, untethered, searching for the reality that matched your vibrational signature. This in-between state explains so much: the loneliness that couldn't be cured by company, the boredom that couldn't be fixed by novelty, the sense that you were waiting for something without knowing what. You weren't waiting for an event or a person. You were waiting for a reality, for a timeline where your consciousness could finally unfold to its full capacity. The universe had placed you here temporarily, like a layover on a much longer journey. Your current reality was never meant to be your final destination. It was a staging ground, a preparation phase, a place to gather strength for the transition ahead. You'd been living in a timeline your consciousness had exceeded, and now it was time to find the one where you truly belonged. The first signs of shifting begin as echoes, subtle reverberations from the timeline that's calling you home. You know this feeling. Déjà vu so intense it makes you dizzy, as if you're experiencing something that happened not just before, but many times before in many different configurations. These aren't memories of past events, they are glimpses of parallel experiences, moments where your consciousness briefly synchronized with its true frequency and caught fragments of the reality you're meant to inhabit. The echoes come in waves. You'll be having a conversation and suddenly everything feels scripted, as if both you and the other person are reciting lines you've performed countless times. The words are the same, the gestures identical, even the lighting seems precisely replicated. But underneath the familiar surface, you can feel something new trying to break through, a different version of this interaction, one with more depth, more authenticity, more aliveness. Your emotional patterns begin looping with mechanical precision, the same disappointments recurring with different people, the same excitement about opportunities that turn out to be mirages, the same loneliness in the same specific flavor, like a song played on repeat until it becomes meaningless background noise. These emotional cycles aren't random, they're evidence that you're oscillating between timelines, touching your current reality and your intended one in alternating rhythms. Dreams become cinema-level vivid, so detailed and coherent that waking life starts to feel like this dream. In these other reality experiences, you're yourself, but more yourself, operating in environments that make sense to you, connected to people who understand you without explanation. You wake from these dreams feeling homesick for places that don't exist in your current timeline, mourning relationships with people you've never met but somehow know intimately. Time distortions intensify. Minutes stretch into subjective hours during mundane conversations, while entire evenings compress into what feels like moments when you're engaged with ideas that resonate with your true frequency. Your internal chronometer is sinking to a different reality, creating temporal seasickness as you exist simultaneously in multiple time streams. The glitches become more frequent. You'll look at familiar objects and they'll appear foreign, as if you're seeing them through different eyes. Your reflection in mirrors occasionally seems like a stranger, not physically different, but expressing an energy that doesn't quite match the person you've been performing. These moments feel like brief downloads from your alternate self, the version of you that exists fully in the timeline you're approaching. People begin responding to you differently without any conscious change in your behavior. Some are inexplicably drawn to you, sensing something shifted in your energy. Others become uncomfortable around you, as if your evolving frequency is highlighting their own stagnation. You're becoming a tuning fork, and those who match your emerging vibration resonate while others feel the dissonance acutely. Synchronicities multiply exponentially, numbers that follow you everywhere, books that fall open to exactly the passage you needed to read, conversations overheard at precisely the moment their content becomes relevant to your situation. These aren't coincidences, they're breadcrumbs left by your future self, signals from the timeline that's preparing to receive you. Your tolerance for inauthenticity evaporates. Small talk becomes physically uncomfortable. Superficial entertainment loses all appeal. You find yourself unable to participate in conversations that once felt too normal. Not because you're judging them, but because your frequency can no longer maintain connection with those wavelengths. You're like a radio that's lost the ability to receive AM stations. The signal is still broadcasting, but you're no longer equipped to decode it. The echoes create a feedback loop. Each glimpse of your true timeline makes your current reality feel more artificial, more constraining. You begin seeing through the illusions that once seemed solid. Social conventions reveal themselves as arbitrary agreements. Cultural norms appear as collective hypnosis. The matrix of your current timeline becomes visible, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. During the most intense echo episodes, you can feel both timelines simultaneously. your current one growing thin and translucent, while the intended one pulses with increasing solidity. These moments are disorienting but exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a dimensional portal, feeling the gravitational pull of your true home. The emotional repetitions serve a purpose. They're showing you what you're leaving behind. Each loop through the same feelings is an opportunity to extract the lessons, to complete the experiences, to say goodbye to the patterns that belong to your outgrown timeline. You're not stuck. You're wrapping up, finishing the curriculum, preparing to graduate. Sometimes the echoes are so strong that you can almost reach through them and touch the other side. In these peak moments, you understand that what you've been experiencing isn't malfunction, but preparation. Your consciousness has been stretching across dimensional boundaries, building bridges between your current location and your ultimate destination. The timeline echoes are accelerating now, growing stronger and more frequent. They're no longer subtle background music. They're becoming the dominant frequency. Your original timeline is fading while your true one gains definition and clarity. The oscillation is preparing to resolve into a permanent shift, like a pendulum finding its new center of gravity. You are no longer fully here, and you're not yet fully there, but you can feel the transition building momentum. The echoes are no longer just glimpses, they're invitations. The other timeline isn't just calling to you anymore, it's actively pulling you home. Your consciousness has stretched as far as it can across the dimensional gap. Soon it will make the jump completely, leaving behind the reality that was never truly yours and finally claiming the one that has been waiting for you all along. Your alienation is not personal, it's structural. This revelation hits with the force of recognition, like suddenly understanding a language you didn't know you were already speaking. The loneliness that has followed you like a shadow your entire life wasn't evidence of your inadequacy, it was proof of your evolution. You weren't being rejected by the world, you were outgrowing it. Think about a butterfly in chrysalis. During transformation, the caterpillar literally dissolves, its old form becoming unrecognizable soup before reorganizing into something entirely new. The process isn't comfortable. The caterpillar doesn't understand what's happening to it. From the outside, it might appear that something has gone terribly wrong. But this dissolution isn't destruction, it's metamorphosis. You've been in your own chrysalis, your consciousness undergoing a fundamental restructuring that makes connection with your original environment increasingly impossible. The people around you aren't consciously rejecting you. They're responding to a frequency they can no longer match. You're vibrating at a level that creates cognitive dissonance in those still anchored to the timeline you're leaving behind. This is what happens when a soul reaches its resonance threshold, the point where your vibrational frequency exceeds the capacity of your birth environment to contain or understand you. It's like trying to play a symphony through a toy piano. The music is magnificent, but the instrument can only produce a few simple notes. The limitation isn't in the music, it's in the medium. Your childhood feelings of being an outsider weren't paranoia or oversensitivity. You were literally an outsider, a consciousness that had incarnated in the wrong frequency band. While other children were learning to navigate the social and emotional landscape of your shared timeline, you were already operating from a higher bandwidth. Their games felt meaningless because you were receiving signals from a more complex reality, the emotional patterns that have repeated throughout your life, the sense of being misunderstood, the difficulty forming lasting connections, the way conversations felt like performances. These weren't character flaws, they were symptoms of dimensional displacement. You were trying to exist in a reality that was too small for your actual size, like a giant squeezed into a dollhouse, unable to move naturally. Every relationship that couldn't sustain your depth, every job that felt hollow, every social interaction that left you drained, these weren't failure. They were evidence that your consciousness had evolved beyond the parameters of your starting timeline. You kept trying to force yourself into spaces that were never designed to accommodate what you'd become. The loneliness was inevitable and necessary. It served as a pressure system, creating the discomfort needed to motivate your eventual departure. Like a bird whose cage has become too small, the confinement itself becomes the catalyst for seeking freedom. Your alienation was your soul's way of preparing you for migration. This understanding brings a strange relief, like finally getting a diagnosis for symptoms you'd endured for years without explanation. The problem was never with you. It was with the match. You weren't too sensitive, too complicated, too intense, too different. You were simply operating at a frequency that your environment couldn't support. But recognition also brings grief. You mourn the years spent trying to fix yourself instead of understanding that you were already whole, just misplaced. You feel sadness for all the times you dimmed your light, modulated your voice, contorted your nature, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. You grieve the energy wasted, attempting to make impossible connections work. The people in your life weren't equipped to see your true nature because they were viewing you through the lens of their own frequency limitations. It's like trying to see ultraviolet light with eyes that can only perceive the visible spectrum. The light is there, brilliant and beautiful, but the receiver lacks the capacity to detect it. Your spiritual evolution has been accelerated, compressed into a lifetime what might normally take several incarnations. This acceleration created the intensity of displacement you've experienced. You've been living multiple lifetimes worth of growth in one body, one timeline, one identity. No wonder you felt stretched beyond recognition. The threshold you've crossed changes everything about how you relate to reality. Colors appear more vibrant because you're seeing additional frequencies. Conversations reveal subtext that others miss because you're reading between dimensional lines. Situations feel familiar because you're accessing information from parallel experiences. You're not losing your mind, you're gaining access to multidimensional awareness. This expanded perception explains why normal life feels increasingly artificial. You're seeing through the simulation, recognizing the constructed nature of social conventions, feeling the arbitrary quality of systems that others experience as natural law. Your consciousness has grown large enough to perceive the edges of your reality, and those edges are much closer than most people realize. The truth is both liberating and isolating. You understand now why connection has been so difficult. You've been trying to relate to people across dimensional boundaries, like shouting to someone on the other side of soundproof glass. The absence of response wasn't rejection. It was the physics of incompatible frequencies. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not inadequate or defective or wrong. You're a consciousness in transition, a soul that has outgrown its starting parameters and is preparing to relocate to a reality that can accommodate your actual magnitude. The loneliness was never punishment, it was preparation. The alienation wasn't evidence of your failure, it was proof of your readiness to ascend. You feel like you don't belong anywhere because the place you belong is ahead of you, not behind. The calling begins as whispers, sudden downloads of knowing that arrive without context, intuitive insights that feel both foreign and familiar. You'll be going about your day when information simply appears in your mind, complete and crystalline, like finding a book already written in a language you're just remembering how to read. These aren't thoughts you think, they're transmissions you receive from the timeline that's preparing to welcome you home. The downloads come in waves, each one carrying the signature of your intended reality. Understanding arrives about subjects you've never studied, solutions to problems you didn't know existed, perspectives that reframe your entire understanding of existence. It's as if your future self is leaking wisdom backward through time, breadcrumbs of consciousness leading you toward your true destination. You find yourself inexplicably drawn to certain ideas, concepts that resonate at a cellular level despite having no apparent connection to your current life. Ancient wisdom traditions that feel like homecoming. Scientific theories that make your soul vibrate with recognition. Artistic expressions that move you to tears for reasons you can't explain. These aren't random interests. They are pieces of your authentic timeline bleeding through the dimensional membrane. The attraction feels magnetic, cellular, undeniable. When you encounter these resonant frequencies, your entire being lights up as if receiving a signal from home. Time stops, your breathing deepens, your chest expands with a feeling of rightness so profound it brings tears. These moments are glimpses of your natural habitat, previews of the reality where your consciousness can finally unfold without constraint. Dreams become epic journeys to landscapes that feel more real than waking life. Not symbolic dreams filled with metaphors requiring interpretation, but direct experiences in alternate configurations of existence. You wake from these nocturnal adventures with detailed memories of conversations with beings who understand you completely, of participating in activities that utilize your full range of capabilities, of existing in environments perfectly calibrated to your frequency. In these dream experiences, you're still yourself but amplified, all your best qualities operating at maximum capacity without the friction and limitation you experience in your current timeline. You speak languages you don't know, understand sciences beyond your education, navigate social structures that make perfect sense despite being completely different from anything in your waking reality. These dreams aren't fantasy, they are reconnaissance missions, your consciousness exploring the territory it's preparing to inhabit. Relationships begin dissolving without drama or conflict, not through argument or betrayal, but through a gradual recognition of incompatibility that feels mutual and inevitable. People who were once central to your life start feeling like acquaintances from a previous incarnation. The emotional bonds simply lose their adhesive quality, not through any failure of love, but through a shift in vibrational frequency that makes sustained connection impossible. This isn't rejection, it's evolution. You're not losing people, you're outgrowing the version of yourself that those relationships were designed to support. Like a snake shedding skin, the old connections fall away naturally as your expanding consciousness requires new forms of intimacy and understanding. The ending feels sad but not tragic, nostalgic but not devastating. Meanwhile, you begin attracting different types of people, individuals who can match your emerging frequency, who recognize you without needing explanation, who seem to be operating from the same expanded awareness. These new connections feel effortless, telepathic almost, as if you're finally meeting your actual tribe after years of trying to fit in with well-meaning strangers. Synchronicities become your primary form of communication with the universe. Numbers that chase you, songs that play at precisely the right moment, conversations overheard that contain exactly the message you needed to receive. The boundary between internal and external experience grows thin as your intended timeline reaches through the dimensional fabric to guide your transition. Books fall open to passages that speak directly to your current situation. Strangers approach you with information that proves relevant hours later. Technology glitches in ways that redirect you toward opportunities you would have missed. The universe is conspiring to support your shift, creating a navigation system of meaningful coincidences to guide you home. Your tolerance for anything inauthentic evaporates completely. Superficial conversation becomes physically uncomfortable. Entertainment that once provided distraction now feels like static. Work that doesn't align with your deeper purpose becomes literally unbearable, as if your consciousness is rejecting any activity that doesn't match your true frequency. This isn't pickiness or spiritual superiority, it's calibration. Your internal guidance system has become so refined that it can immediately detect the difference between experiences that nourish your evolution and those that drain your energy. You're like a radio that has finally been tuned to the correct station, making all other frequencies sound like noise. The calling intensifies daily. What began as gentle suggestions becomes urgent invitation. The other timeline isn't just attracting you anymore, it's actively pulling you toward it with increasing force. You can feel yourself being drawn into a reality that matches your actual nature, like a magnet finally finding its matching pole. Sometimes the pull is so strong you can almost see through the veil between worlds. In these peak moments, you glimpse the life that's waiting for you, not perfect or without challenge, but aligned, authentic, alive in ways your current existence has never been. You see yourself operating at full capacity, connected to others who truly see you, engaged in work that matters, existing in an environment that supports rather than constrains your deepest nature. You're not homesick for the past, you're homesick for the future. The aching in your chest isn't nostalgia but anticipation, the recognition that everything you've been searching for exists not behind you but ahead of you, in a timeline where your consciousness can finally match your environment. The place you belong isn't a location in your current reality, it's a frequency you're approaching, a dimensional destination that has been calling your name since the day you were born into the wrong world. You're not losing your life. You're shedding the version of yourself that was built for the wrong reality. But knowing this doesn't make the process less devastating. As your consciousness transitions toward its true timeline, everything anchored to your old frequency begins to destabilize. The life you've spent years constructing, carefully built relationships, career trajectories, social identities starts dissolving around you like a sandcastle at high tide. People drop away with startling suddenness, not through dramatic confrontations or betrayals, but through a gradual recognition that the person they knew no longer exists. Friends who once sought your company become distant, sensing something fundamentally different about your energy, even if they can't articulate what's changed. Family members grow uncomfortable around you, responding to frequencies they don't understand but can feel disrupting their familiar patterns. The dissolution feels mutual but heartbreaking. You look at people you once felt close to and realize you're viewing them through new eyes, seeing limitations and patterns that were invisible before your expansion. Their concerns feel trivial, their conversations superficial, their worldviews constrained. It's not that you judge them, you simply can't access the part of yourself that once resonated with their frequency. Career paths that once seemed promising become prisons. Work that provided satisfaction now feels like elaborate busy work designed to keep consciousness distracted from its true purpose. You find yourself unable to summon enthusiasm for projects that once excited you, unable to participate in office politics that once seemed important, unable to maintain the professional persona that once felt natural. The performance becomes impossible to maintain. Your face won't hold the expressions expected in certain contexts. Your voice won't produce the inflections required for small talk. Your body language shifts in subtle ways that make colleagues uncomfortable without understanding why. You're like an actor who has forgotten how to play the role because they've remembered who they really are. Professional relationships strain under the weight of your transformation. People who once valued your contributions find your new energy disruptive to their equilibrium. Your expanded perspective reveals inefficiencies and meaninglessness that others prefer to keep hidden. Your inability to fake enthusiasm becomes threatening to those who need shared delusion to maintain their comfort. The financial structures of your old life begin crumbling. Income sources that felt secure become unstable. Investments that seemed wise start failing. The abundance that once flowed through certain channels dries up as your energy shifts away from systems designed to support your previous incarnation. Money that once came easily becomes scarce, as if the universe is systematically removing the foundations of your outdated existence. Material possessions lose their meaning. Objects that once held sentimental value feel like artifacts from someone else's life. Your home, furniture, decorations, even this arrangement of spaces begins feeling foreign, as if you're house-sitting for a person who no longer exists. The physical environment reflects the internal shift, becoming increasingly incompatible with your evolving vibration. The loneliness during this phase is crushing, different from the alienation you felt before your awakening. This isn't the loneliness of not being understood, it's the isolation of being between worlds, no longer able to connect with your old reality, but not yet fully arrived in your new one. You exist in a liminal space, a dimensional purgatory where nothing feels solid or real. Sleep becomes elusive as your consciousness struggles to process the magnitude of change. Dreams shift from vivid journeys to chaotic processing sessions where your psyche attempts to integrate the dissolution of everything familiar. You wake feeling exhausted, as if you've spent the night in intensive therapy sessions with your soul. Identity confusion reaches peak intensity. The personality you've worn like clothing for decades suddenly feels ill-fitting, but you're not sure what lies beneath it. Who are you without the roles, relationships, and responsibilities that once defined you? What remains when everything you thought was permanent reveals itself as temporary costume? Old coping mechanisms stop working. Distractions that once provided relief, entertainment, social media, shopping, even spiritual practices lose their effectiveness. Nothing can distract you from the magnitude of transformation occurring within your consciousness. You're forced to sit with the discomfort of dissolution without escape routes. Friends and family become concerned. They stage interventions, offer advice, suggest therapy or medication. They see your life falling apart and want to help you return to stability, not understanding that stability in your old frequency would be like asking a butterfly to return to its caterpillar body. Their loving attempts to rescue you feel like invitations to spiritual suicide. The fear is overwhelming. Every structure that provided security is crumbling simultaneously, and you have no blueprint for what's coming next. Your old timeline offered predictability, even if it was constraining. This transition offers only uncertainty, the promise that something better awaits without guarantees about timing or specifics. Yet underneath the terror, there's a strange relief. The exhaustion of maintaining a life that never fit finally ends. The pressure of performing a personality that wasn't authentic dissolves. The loneliness of being misunderstood transforms into the solitude necessary for deep transformation. You're not losing your life, you're losing your prison. In the darkest moments of this collapse, you catch glimpses of what's emerging. Between the debris of your dissolving identity, you sense something vast and luminous waiting to be born. The version of yourself that's been compressed and constrained for decades is finally getting space to unfold. The collapse isn't destruction, it's controlled demolition, clearing space for a structure designed to house your actual magnitude. The old identity was never really yours. It was a costume designed to help you navigate a reality that was never your permanent home. Now that the play is ending, the costume comes off, revealing the performer who was always there, waiting for the right stage, the right audience, the right reality to showcase their true artistry. You're not falling apart. You're falling together in a configuration that can finally contain the fullness of who you've always been. The acceleration starts without warning, like a cosmic gear shifting into higher frequency. You wake one morning and immediately sense that something fundamental has changed in the fabric of reality itself. The air feels different, more electric, more alive, humming with possibility. Your body vibrates at a cellular level, as if every atom has been tuned to a new frequency overnight. This isn't anxiety or excitement, it's pure energetic momentum, like being caught in the gravitational pull of a star. Your heartbeat synchronizes to a rhythm that doesn't match your physical pulse. There's a second heartbeat now, deeper and more ancient, drumming the cadence of your true timeline. It's been there all along, you realize, but now it's strong enough to override the superficial rhythm of your temporary reality. The sound fills your chest with anticipation so intense it borders on prophetic knowing. Physical symptoms manifest as your consciousness prepares for dimensional transfer. Sleep becomes impossible, not from restlessness, but from activation. Your body feels like it has been plugged into a cosmic charging station, every cell upgrading its capacity to hold more light, more awareness, more authentic being. You lie awake watching energy patterns behind your closed ears, swirling galaxies of light that seem to be reconfiguring your neural pathways for expanded perception. Food loses its appeal as your system recalibrates, not from illness, but from a growing sense that you're preparing to sustain yourself on different types of nourishment, on frequency itself, on alignment, on the pure energy of finally existing in the right reality. Your body knows it's about to be fed properly for the first time in this lifetime. Time distortions reach peak intensity. Minutes expand into hours during moments of high resonance, while entire days compress into heartbeats when you're engaged with energies from your approaching timeline. Your internal chronometer has completely disconnected from consensus time, operating instead on the rhythm of dimensional transition. You're living simultaneously in multiple time streams, watching them converge toward a single moment of resolution. Synchronicities don't just multiply, they become the dominant organizing principle of your existence. Every number you see, every song that plays, every conversation you overhear forms part of an intricate communication system orchestrated by your future self. The universe has become a massive telegraph machine sending you constant updates about your imminent arrival in the reality where you truly belong. People begin appearing in your life who clearly belong to your intended timeline. Not slowly, not gradually, but suddenly, as if they've been transported directly from your destination reality to serve as advanced scouts. These individuals recognize you immediately, with a knowing that bypasses normal social protocols. Conversations with them feel like reunions with family you've never met but somehow remember. They speak your internal language, understand your references to experiences you've never shared, respond to thoughts you haven't voiced. When you're with them, the exhausting work of translation, the constant effort to make yourself comprehensible to people operating on different frequencies, simply disappears. For the first time in your life, you can exist without editing, without performance, without the careful modulation you've used to survive in your mismatched reality. Ideas begin downloading at accelerated speed, complete understanding arriving in packages too large for your current context to contain. You find yourself knowing things you've never learned, understanding systems you've never studied, seeing solutions to problems that haven't yet been recognized by your current timeline. This isn't psychic ability, it's information leaking backward from your approaching future. Knowledge bleeding through the dimensional membrane as the barriers between timelines thin. The downloads come with such intensity that you have to take notes, create documents, capture the influx before it overwhelms your capacity to process. But even as you write, you sense that this information isn't meant for your current reality. It's equipment you'll need in the timeline you're approaching, tools being delivered in advance of your arrival. Your tolerance for anything inauthentic becomes absolute zero. Conversations that once felt merely tedious now create physical discomfort. Environments that were previously manageable become impossible to inhabit. People whose energy once felt neutral now register as actively draining. Your system has become so sensitive to frequency mismatch that exposure to anything misaligned creates immediate and intense rejection responses. This isn't pickiness, it's precision. Your consciousness has been calibrated to detect your exact frequency with such accuracy that anything off by even the smallest degree feels jarringly wrong. You're like a musical instrument that has been perfectly tuned, making every out-of-tune note around you painfully obvious. The pull from your intended timeline becomes irresistible. What started as gentle attraction has become magnetic force, so powerful that resistance is no longer possible. You can feel yourself being drawn across dimensional space, your consciousness stretching toward its true home like metal filings toward a magnet. The sensation is both thrilling and terrifying, like being caught in a riptide that you know is carrying you towards safety rather than destruction. Reality begins responding to your shifting frequency in unprecedented ways. Technology behaves differently around you, devices working better or breaking in meaningful patterns. Animals approach you with unusual trust, as if recognizing something in your energy that wasn't there before. Even weather seems to shift in response to your internal states, creating external conditions that mirror your expanding consciousness. In quiet moments, you can feel the membrane between timelines wearing thin. The edges of your current reality become visible, revealing the constructed nature of the world you're preparing to leave. Like seeing the seams in a theatrical backdrop, you begin to perceive the artificial boundaries that have contained your experience for so long. The acceleration is building towards something definitive. Every fibre of your being knows that the moment of transfer is approaching, not in some distant future, but imminently, inevitably. The vibrational momentum has reached critical mass. Your consciousness has stretched as far as it can across the dimensional gap. The shift isn't just coming, it's already begun. You're in the final moments of your old reality, experiencing the last breaths of a life that was never meant to be permanent. What comes next isn't just change, it's homecoming. Your true timeline is the one where your frequency finally feels like home. The transfer happens not with dramatic fanfare, but with profound relief, like taking your first breath after holding it underwater for a lifetime. One moment you're vibrating against the grain of reality, and the next you're in perfect resonance with everything around you. The shift is so natural, so right, that you wonder how you ever existed any other way. The first sensation is peace so shocking it brings tears. Not the peace of relaxation or temporary calm, but the bone-deep recognition that you have arrived in the reality you were always meant to inhabit. Your nervous system, which has been in constant low-level alarm for decades, finally relaxes. The background tension you didn't even know you carried, the perpetual readiness for misunderstanding, rejection, or disconnect simply dissolves. Colours appear more vivid, not because anything has changed externally, but because your perception is no longer filtered through the distortion of dimensional displacement. You see the world as it actually is, rather than through the warped lens of existing in the wrong frequency. Everything looks more real, more saturated, more alive, as if you've spent your entire life viewing reality through dirty glass that has suddenly been cleaned. People understand you without effort or explanation. Conversations that would have required careful translation in your previous timeline flow with effortless comprehension. Your thoughts, feelings, and perspectives are met with recognition rather than confusion. When you speak, you see understanding dawn in their eyes, not the polite blankness you learn to expect from those operating on different frequencies. These aren't just compatible people, they're your actual tribe, consciousness operating at the same bandwidth, souls vibrating in harmony with your natural rhythm. Their humour makes sense to you. Their concerns align with yours. Their way of processing information matches your own cognitive patterns. For the first time in your life, you feel truly seen, not because you've finally explained yourself successfully, but because no explanation is necessary. Opportunities begin appearing with elegant timing, as if the universe has been orchestrating possibilities specifically for your arrival. Career paths that utilize your unique capabilities emerge organically. Creative projects that match your vision receive unexpected support. Financial abundance flows through channels that feel aligned with your values rather than requiring you to compromise your integrity for survival. The striving stops. In your previous timeline, everything required enormous effort. Building relationships, advancing professionally, even maintaining basic well-being demanded constant vigilance and strategic thinking. Here, paths unfold naturally when you follow your authentic impulses. Doors open before you reach them. Resources appear when needed. The right people arrive at precisely the right moments. This isn't about everything becoming easy. Challenges still exist, but they feel purposeful rather than arbitrary. Problems arise that are actually solvable rather than systemic incompatibilities disguised as personal difficulties. The energy you previously spent fighting against the grain of reality is now available for creative expression, meaningful contribution, and genuine growth. Your living environment transforms to match your frequency, not necessarily through moving to a new location, but through a shift in how space responds to your presence. Rooms feel more comfortable, lighting seems more flattering, even mundane objects appear more beautiful. Your home becomes a sanctuary rather than a place you tolerate, reflecting the harmony between your inner and outer experience. Relationships deepen into authentic intimacy. The careful performances you maintain to avoid overwhelming others with your intensity are no longer necessary, or people can handle your full presence, your complete thoughts, your unedited emotional range. Vulnerability becomes safe because you're surrounded by consciousness that can match and hold your actual depth. Love arrives in forms you didn't know were possible, not just romantic love, but recognition love, creative love, purposeful love. You experience the profound satisfaction of being witnessed in your totality rather than in carefully edited highlights. The loneliness that has been your constant companion for decades finally ends, replaced by the deep belonging that comes from existing in your proper energetic ecosystem. Creativity explodes from the relief of finally having appropriate context for expression. Ideas that seemed too complex or unusual for your previous timeline find perfect reception here. Projects that would have met with confusion or resistance are welcomed as valuable contributions. Your unique perspective, which once felt like a burden of difference, reveals itself as exactly the gift this reality needs. Physical health stabilizes as your system is no longer fighting constant environmental mismatch. The mysterious symptoms, chronic fatigue, and inexplicable ailments that plagued your transition period resolve as your body adjusts to existing in its proper frequency. You feel energized by activities that align with your nature rather than drained by constant adaptation to incompatible circumstances. Money flows more easily, not because you've learned better strategies, but because your energy is now aligned with abundance channels that match your vibrational signature. Work that previously felt like selling your soul transforms into contribution that feels authentic. Success comes through expressing your genuine nature rather than through elaborate performances of who you think you should be. The constant vigilance relaxes. You no longer scan every environment for signs of rejection or misunderstanding. Your guard drops because you're finally in a reality that can handle your presence without protection or translation. The hyper-awareness that developed as a survival mechanism in your mismatched timeline becomes available for appreciation and wonder, rather than threat detection. Reality responds to your coherence with almost magical precision. Situations align, people appear, resources materialize in ways that feel like the universe conspiring to support your authentic expression. This isn't wishful thinking or spiritual bypassing, it's the natural result of finally existing in resonance with your environment rather than in opposition to it. Everything clicks into place with the satisfaction of a puzzle piece finding its proper position. The struggles that defined your previous existence, the relationships that never quite worked, the career paths that felt hollow, the persistent sense of swimming upstream, all reveal themselves to have been symptoms of dimensional displacement rather than personal failures. You're home, not in a location but in a frequency, not in circumstances, but in coherence. The reality you've been seeking isn't external, it's the natural expression of your consciousness when it's finally free to operate without interference, opposition, or the need to dim itself for compatibility with an environment that was never meant to contain your light. You never failed to belong, you were just arriving early. This truth hits with the force of revelation, reframing every moment of alienation you've experienced as evidence not of your inadequacy, but of your acceleration. The loneliness wasn't punishment for being different. It was the natural consequence of evolving faster than your environment could accommodate. You were a preview of what's possible, a herald of consciousness expansion, living proof that reality can hold more than most people imagine. Your alienation was initiation, a necessary passage through the wilderness of disconnection that prepared you for authentic belonging. Every moment of feeling misunderstood was strengthening your ability to understand others. Every experience of being unseen was developing your capacity to truly see. Every instance of rejection was teaching you to value recognition when it finally arrived. The timeline you've inhabited until now wasn't your destination, it was your training ground. Like a spiritual apprenticeship conducted in the most challenging possible conditions, your early incarnation taught you to maintain your frequency, despite complete environmental incompatibility. You learned to hold your truth without external validation, to trust your inner knowing without confirmation, to love yourself without reciprocal recognition. You were never broken, you were never too much, you were never inadequately equipped for existence. You were a consciousness from the future, temporarily stationed in a reality that couldn't yet support your magnitude, gathering experience and developing strength for the timeline where your gifts would be not just appreciated, but essential. The people who couldn't understand you weren't failing to see your value. They were operating from frequencies that literally couldn't receive your transmission. Like radios tuned to AM trying to pick up FM signals, the limitation wasn't in the quality of your broadcast, but in the compatibility of their receivers. Your message was perfect, it simply required the right audience. Every relationship that couldn't sustain your depth was preparing you to recognize authentic connection when it appeared. Every job that felt meaningless was clarifying your understanding of purposeful work. Every environment that felt constraining was strengthening your appreciation for true freedom. Your mismatched experiences were developing your discernment, teaching you to distinguish between what looks good and what actually fits. The financial struggles, the professional confusion, the social awkwardness, these weren't evidence of your inability to succeed, but symptoms of trying to thrive in systems designed for different types of consciousness. You were attempting to plant seeds in soil that couldn't support your particular species of growth. The failure wasn't in the seeds, but in the ground. Your sensitivity, which felt like a curse in your original timeline, reveals itself as a sophisticated guidance system designed to navigate higher frequencies. Your inability to tolerate superficiality wasn't dysfunction, but precision. An internal compass calibrated to detect authentic connection and meaningful engagement. Your depth wasn't overwhelming, it was appropriately scaled for the reality you were approaching. The dreams that felt impossible in your old environment aren't delusions, they are previews. The visions that seem too grand for your circumstances aren't fantasies, but blueprints for the life that's actually available in your true timeline. What looked like unrealistic expectations were accurate perceptions of what's possible when your environment matches your frequency. You belong to the timeline where your soul finally recognizes itself, where your gifts are not just welcome but necessary, where your perspective is valued rather than tolerated. You belong to the reality where your sensitivity is respected as wisdom, where your depth is appreciated as richness, where your intensity is celebrated as passion rather than feared as too much. This belonging isn't something you have to earn or achieve, it's something you've grown into. Like a tree that has finally reached the height where it catches sunlight above the forest canopy, you've expanded beyond the shadows that once obscured your natural radiance. The light was always there, you just needed to grow tall enough to reach it. Your journey through displacement has made you stronger, wiser, more compassionate than you would have been if belonging had come easily. The struggles created depth. The loneliness developed independence. The misunderstanding taught you to trust your own knowing. You're now equipped not just to belong to your true timeline, but to help others who are making the same transition. The alienation is ending, not because you've changed who you are, but because you've finally found the environment where who you are makes perfect sense. The love you've been seeking isn't different from the love you've always deserved. It's the same love, now available in forms that can properly express and receive it. You are stepping into the timeline where your frequency feels like home, where your energy is met with recognition, where your contributions are valued as essential rather than optional. This isn't a reward for surviving displacement, it's your natural habitat, finally accessible now that your consciousness has expanded enough to reach it. The belonging you've been seeking was never behind you in some golden past or conditional future achievement. It was waiting ahead of you in the timeline you were always meant to inhabit once you developed the strength to get there. Your alienation wasn't evidence that you didn't belong anywhere. It was proof that you belonged somewhere so much better that anything less would feel like exile. You were not lost. You were not forgotten. You were not accidentally placed in the wrong reality. You were a consciousness in transition, temporarily stationed between worlds, gathering the strength and wisdom necessary to claim your true home. The waiting is over. The searching is complete. You have arrived not at a destination, but at yourself, finally existing in a reality that can hold the fullness of who you've always been. You belong, you have always belonged, and now, finally, your belonging has found you.